Peyton on the show. We all kind of know Drew Brees is going to probably hang it up sooner rather than later. Peyton actually told Yahoo Sports it could happen here in a week or two. He told us this yesterday about Jameis Winston.
Jameis Winston, we know. We had a year with him. He was fantastic as a leader. Man, he's got tremendous arm talent. He's a young prospect that we like a lot. You know, when you have a player for a season, he's kind of giving you a chance to see what he's about, and there's a little bit of an audition there, but the same audition takes place for us. He's getting a chance to see, hey, this is how they do it here. Does this fit me? Does this head coach, does this position coach, is this a place I feel comfortable playing? And so a lot of times people would say, well, why would you do that for a year? Man, that's invaluable for both sides.
He's speaking the truth right there, Jay, when you talk about the audition for both sides. And he called him a young prospect. So right there, that tells me what Sean's thinking. And look, he didn't play him. And one of the reasons that he didn't play him is because he didn't want others to see him become a better quarterback. And then all of a sudden, that plays into Jameis Winston's decision-making moving forward because he's a free agent. And you know how that goes. Somebody will throw a bag of money at him after 5 games, much like they've done in the past with other players that have played well in the National Football League for a short period of time.
I'm really excited to see if there's been a drastic improvement in the way that he is going to play this year upcoming, right? Because I also wonder, okay, well, yeah, I see what Tom Brady is doing with Bruce Arians, and I see what Jameis Winston did with Bruce Arians, but I wonder how much better of a quarterback coach Sean Payton is than Bruce Arians. Right? So I want to see that evolution and where it can go.
Think about a short sample size of quarterbacks like Teddy Bridgewater that was put on display, cashed in with the Carolina Panthers. Think about Matt Flynn, small sample size in Green Bay, went to Seattle for big money till Pete Carroll realized that dude can't play. And then you talk about a guy like Kevin Cobb several years ago, corn on the cob, played great under Andy Reid, and the next thing you know, he goes to Arizona, they realize can't play. So you don't want to put Jameis in that situation. If you see him every single day and you know, that guy right there, he's going to be special. Shh, don't say anything.
The one thing, Jay, I would say, though, if you heard that comment from Sean Payton, he kind of talked about him like, if I would have just closed my eyes and said, he was talking about Jameis Winston coming out of Florida State, right? He was talking about him like he was a college prospect, not a guy that's been in the league since 2015.
Well, that's why he said he's a young prospect. He's young.
Prospect, right? I mean,
well, because he's on the team. He's not playing. He's a young prospect for us. We got to understand him. He has to understand the way we do things. We, in our mind as fans, we see the 30 interceptions and however many fumbles. Right. So the first thing we think of is he can't play. We also remember the negativity that he put himself in, whether it was the issue with the Uber driver, whether it was his issues at Florida State with the crab legs and the young lady. We think of that.
That's all self-inflicted, though, right?
No, it is all self-inflicted, but we think of those things.
Sure.
Sean and them aren't thinking of that right now because he's basically on their team. They only are looking at him spin the football. They're not paying attention to the 30 interceptions. They're paying attention to fixing the 30 interceptions.
Yeah, I would also say, lastly, people mature in life. I think what happens is when those things happened with Winston, it's just like a scarlet letter that's never going away from him.
Yes.
But Winston has actually said, I'm engaged now, I'm settled down, I'm a different person. But for whatever reason, Jay, all we want to do is just continually bring those things up.
Well, because we only remember what you've done lately, right? And that's the last thing that we remember about him. But there's been nothing that's been said from Jameis Winston this entire year. I love that. That means he's going to work.
No question about it. We are presented by Progressive Insurance. Our question of the morning, the unsung heroes.
Down against the Falcons. But really, Key, in terms of the Super Bowl, my favorite part of it would be I would just follow Tom throughout the week leading up to the game. And so we would have these marathon media sessions, 45 minutes, an hour, and I would just sort of wedge myself. You talk about standing outside of Gillette Stadium, that shot you love, Keith? Like, I would just be at Tom's podium. And one of my favorite moments would be, you know, when he would get emotional. And he had this reporter, it was a kid reporter, he was on Trent Dilfer's shoulders, and he said, Tom, who's your hero? And Tom responded, like with almost like his eyes moistening. He's my dad, and it was this emotional, real moment leading up to a Super Bowl. So it was stuff like that where you saw the human side of Tom leading up to these Super Bowls, and just that time accumulated that you spend with him leading up to these games.
Speaking of the Super Bowl, if the Pats are to get back to the Super Bowl, will Cam Newton be on that 53-man roster next year?
I would say right now, Key, I would look in a different direction. And I think part of that was the limitations they had in the passing game. I have to believe, and I sense this, they'd like to be better in that area, and they're sort of balancing two parts. One, they didn't necessarily put Cam in the best position to succeed as a passer because of the weapons around him. At the same time, I think they're going to look at quarterbacks that maybe they envision being a little bit more efficient in that area. And there's a lot of questions as to who that might be, but I sense that they're poking around some other options.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, how challenging was this season ultimately for Bill Belichick?
Incredibly so. I think, for everyone with the COVID, but they had a lot of money tied up on the salary cap. It was sort of a transition year in that sense. And so right now, you look forward, which he always does, and they have good salary cap space. And the sense here that I'm getting is that they're going to be pretty aggressive to try to, improve the talent on the roster, because what was apparent, I would think, to Bill Belichick and certainly to everyone watching the team, was that they have some notable holes that they need to fill.
So what do we think at the QB position? Are we thinking, Ryan Fitzpatrick maybe can come in, you draft a guy like Mac Jones? Are you thinking bringing Jimmy G back to the table? What do you think is the most viable option for them next year?
So much of it depends on other teams. Like you mentioned Jimmy G, and that would be a great option for them because they had him here and they know what he's all about. But is San Francisco really going to move on from him? And they can't sort of wait around to see how that happens. They have the 15th overall pick in the draft, so, Mac Jones, perhaps, if he's there, is an option they could consider. But I do think they're going to want to add a more experienced quarterback, whether they go that route or not in the draft. So it's just sort of following the musical chairs of quarterbacks around the NFL. Like you look at a team like the Raiders with Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota. Do they keep both those guys? Maybe Mariota's a guy that the Patriots would consider. Carson Wentz discussion has been sort of percolating in media circles the last couple of days. Would the Eagles be willing to deal him sort of like the Rams did with Goff, where they give up a pick just for someone to take on the salary? So all these scenarios are possibilities, I guess you would say, for the Patriots, but so much of it is contingent on what the other teams are thinking with these quarterbacks around the league. And then you mentioned Fitzpatrick, the free agents. I think any option like that is certainly more of a bridge to a longer-term option that they would ideally like.
Mike Reese, ESPN Patriots reporter, is joining us on Keyshawn, J. Will, and Zubin. Mike, there's been, you hear things out there, and it may not come from us at ESPN. It may come from other sources, so to speak, about trying to acquire a quarterback. I heard through a little birdie that Matthew Stafford did not want to be a New England Patriot in trade conversations. Now, whether that's true or not, do you think it's going to be very difficult to acquire a quarterback given the rich history of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick's connection, and you are following a major legend, and you have to live up to that people would just say, quarterbacks, and be, nah, I don't want to do that. Matt Ryan, Mariota, those guys, I don't want to do that.
Key, I don't think it's that as much as that it's just hard to find a quarterback, okay? And I'm going to actually spin it a little differently. I would be less worried about that for the Patriots than them getting a quarterback in here so they can get other players around the quarterback. So, for example, if you don't have your quarterback situation squared away at the start of free agency and you're going after some of these top targets like, let's say, a Hunter Henry, a tight end, or, Chris Godwin, if he makes it to the market, a receiver, that type of guy, like those guys are going to want to know who's throwing them the football. right? And if they're deciding between the Patriots and another team that has an established quarterback, I think it's more about, like, there's just not a lot of quarterbacks to go around, Keyshawn. And Stafford, that's an interesting case. Like, I think that's more individual to a player who played in an indoor stadium and was more inclined to go to the West Coast. I think that's less about the Patriots and more about that specific individual player than a bigger picture issue that the Patriots themselves are facing.
Well, more not necessarily the organization, more about following Tom, right? Like, even though you got a year away from Tom with Cam there, you're following a guy who went to 13 championships,